Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I was going to talk about tourism. I was going to talk about how a market of tourists from EU, which was pre-Brexit, was worth about 15 billion and employed about 200,000 people, how that has more or less completely collapsed because Europeans simply aren't coming here anymore. I think they find it too expensive, they find it too complicated, they don't want the delays, they have to get passports, they haven't already got them, and then when they get here they find that we don't like them very much anyway. And of course they've all read the stories about us throwing our sewage in the rivers and the seas, so they probably think we're a bit dirty anyway. So London, which was once absolutely packed with tourists throughout the year from the EU, is now much quieter, and that is a great loss. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Before I do tell you what I want to talk about, I just wanted to go through one or two things that happened last week that caught my eye. Some are Brexit related, some are not. The OBR at the beginning of the week announced that's the Office of Budget and Responsibility. That is a government department. They announced that our imports and exports, our trade with the EU is now down 15%, and that is likely to continue long term. They also announced that our productivity is down 4%. We already started off with very low productivity, so our productivity is even lower than it was. And the effects of low productivity and the effects of the loss of trade with the EU amounts to about £1,300 per worker on average throughout the country. And I think I'm pretty sure that most people would think the loss of £1,300 a year is well worth it for being able to take back control of something. In February, there was no economic growth whatsoever. We flatlined, which is unfortunate because Rishi was telling us that he's going to boost the economy this year. We wait to see what happens next month anyway. The IMF have now said that their forecast is that we will be the slowest growing, actually not the slowest growing, we'll be the only country in the G20 to actually, for our economy to shrink this year. We will in fact be behind Russia. Now I think that's understandable because obviously Russia has got a much more competent and sensible government than we've got, but nonetheless it's rather unfortunate that we're going to be the absolute bottom of the G20. There was also a little bit of news on the CPTPP this week as well, because the DTI have had to revise their estimates. Previously, as I think I mentioned last week, I think I said that it's forecast that being members of the CPTPP could add 0.08% to our GDP in 10 years' time if all goes well. Now, I miscalculated that as being 80 pence in £100, but in fact it's 8 pence in £100, so it's not a really significant amount. But what they've announced during the week, the GTI, is that may be an overestimate. It may not be as much as that. So it may only be just 0.02%. Who knows what? Maybe even we'll lose trade as a result of dealing with the CPTP. Who knows? It's all worth it because we've taken back control. We learned also, for example, things like life expectancy. I think I mentioned this last week. Life expectancy in poorer areas of this country is going down, largely due to diet. People are having to resort to cheap junk food and so on. And the difference between life expectancy in poor and rich countries is as much as 10 years, apparently. Not only that, there's a great growth in diabetes. It's becoming a big problem. That's something to do with, obviously related to people being overweight and so on. I mean, this is all going to cost the health service in the future. It's all really bad for the country. Pharmacies apparently are in crisis at the moment. A lot of them are closing down. A lot of them can't get drugs and so on. So that's a further problem for the NHS. So all in all, not a lot of good news there. On a lighter note, the only slightly good thing is that our wonderful Liz Truss is now, she's touring the stand-up comedy circuit in America, and she's got them in fits, telling them all about how she was absolutely right all along, and if only we listened to her, who knows how well we'd have done. Anyway, yes, it's been a great success, and she's, I'm sure, making lots of money to supplement her £155,000 a year ex-Prime Minister's salary, which obviously she must struggle to make do with. But I suppose the big event of this week was Joe Biden coming to to Europe and coming to Ireland and stopping for a refuel in Belfast and meeting little Rishi. And I think if nothing else illustrates our position in the world. It was that one photograph taken of little Rishi with his head in his cup, and Biden sat back looking utterly bored and looking absolutely contemptuous. And I'm sure he feels nothing but contempt, as most of the world do, for a country which has decided to destroy itself, to absolutely wreck its economy. And I think he could barely be bothered to speak to Sunak, such as his lack of respect for him and for us. And for not for us as a nation, but for our government. It was really, I thought, quite a powerful image, and one that certainly resonated with me. Now, last week on Newsnight, there was a guy speaking on behalf of the Tory party called Lord Bethel. Now, on Newsnight's about the only news program on BBC where they're pretty fair. They're not really biased in the way that so much else on BBC is biased. And ministers never appear on it. Every time there's an issue, a political issue, before they introduce the people they're interviewing, they'll say we invited a minister, but no minister was available. Ministers never go on there. But anyway, once in a while, the odd MP turns up and has a say. Anyway, this Lord Bethel was there, and he was speaking on behalf of the Tories. Now, Lord Bethel, he's a hereditary peer. In other words, he inherited all his incompetence and stupidity. But as a hereditary peer, I think he's a fifth baronet or something, so about 100 years ago, one of his forebears did something and got put in the House of Lords. As a result of that, 100 years later, he's entitled to be a part of our government and to sit in the House of Lords and so on, alongside, Ian Botham and Lord Lebedev of Siberia and the Prime Minister's brother and so on. And so he was on, and he was arguing about why the doctors should not be given a rise. He doesn't want them to have a rise. Now, Lord Bethel, he gave some money to Michael Gove. He gave him £5,000 when Michael Gove wanted to be leader of the Tories. And lo and behold, about 9 months later, he was appointed Minister for Procurement of all this Brexit stuff, all this PPE. And at the same time, there was a guy called David Mellor. He's a fashion business, and he gave £3,000 to Michael Gove for his leadership campaign. And so in due course, Michael Gove recommended David Mellor for a PPE contract. Mellor never had any experience of PPE whatsoever, but nonetheless he got a contract for £164 million, which of course Lord Bethel would have waved through, because Lord Bethel was the one who was giving out all these contracts. And his history is quite interesting. What he did as minister for dishing out all these contracts. In fact, during this time, up to July 2020, £17.3 billion worth of contracts were given for PPE. And of those, 17.1 billion were just handed out without any competition, without any scrutiny, just handed out. Now, Lord Bethel gave a contract to a firm called Abingdon Health, £85 million. And all negotiations were done on his private phone and on his WhatsApp. And in due course, people started saying, well, can we have a look at these emails and so on, a few inquiries made and so on. And Lord Bethel, he said, and this was on the 11th of June 2020, he said he'd lost his phone, so he couldn't provide it. And then about a week later, he said he hadn't lost it, but it was broken. The glass was broken. Apparently the battery wasn't working very well, so it wasn't any use, so he couldn't hand it over. And then about 3 weeks later, he said he'd given it to a member of his family. Didn't explain why he couldn't get it back from them. But he said that he thought all the messages would have been backed up, so therefore he deleted them all anyway before he'd given his phone away. So he gave 3 different explanations as to what happened with his phone. And in due course, number 10 Downing Street said that ministers don't conduct business on private phones and private emails and so on. They absolutely denied it. And then subsequently, government lawyers were asked to have a look, and they found that searching certain keywords on Bethel's emails, they found between 18 and 36,000 separate documents that could be relevant to the case. In other words, he was doing a whole thing on his private emails. Now, various companies were recommended to Lord Bethel by different other people, and one company that was recommended by a guy called Lord Agnew. And this is a company called Unicer. Now, Unicer was a lorry company. They would just deliver stuff, and they were delivering PPE all over the country. They must have seen this as a good racket. People obviously making a lot of money out of this, so they decided to get in on it. So they asked for a contract, and sure enough, they got a contract for over £300 million. And turned out this stuff wasn't any good, couldn't use it. But not only was it no good, they were 77 million masks actually. Unicer charged 87 pence each, whereas the NHS were able to buy from another company for 28 pence each. So it was a £45 million surcharge for having to deal with a lorry company, I suppose. And in due course, this stuff, the government, £178 million worth of it, they couldn't use it because it was useless. Because obviously, Unicer, like everybody else, just about who was awarded a contract, they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know who they're buying from. They probably sold a lot of old rubbish, and they didn't know if they were buying the correct stuff. So anyhow, Unicer were then asked to store this because it couldn't be burned, and so far the government has paid them £138 million to store the stuff that they sold them that they can't sell. So it's all going on, and Lord Bethel was he's on top of all this, and so far the government has spent just over £1 billion in storage. This is storage of PPE that can't be used or surplus to requirements. This is mostly containers and fields. You can get an awful lot of fields. You can rent an awful lot of fields for £1 billion. But anyway, that's what it is. In other words, all these people are just taking the government for absolute idiots, and they're being very successful in doing so. Lord Agnew, who recommended Unicer, he also recommended another company called Worldlink Resources, and they got a contract for £258 million. And so it goes on. I mean, I won't bore you with all these because there are dozens and dozens of these cases. They will all get away with it. We heard about Michelle Mone. They seem to be chasing her because she's high profile, but the rest of them are all going to get away with this money. Millions and millions, billions. Now, another company that Lord Agnew pitched for was called Worldlink Resources. And somebody else who also lobbied for this company was a woman called Zoe Lay. And she, together with a former Tory MP called Brooks Newmark, they lobbied Matt Hancock for this company, Worldlink Resources, to get a contract. And lo and behold, they got a contract for £258 million. Searching companies' accounts, company house accounts, no accounts have been submitted for Worldlink Resources. There is a company in Hong Kong called Worldlink Resources, and perhaps it's all belongs to them. Who knows what's happened? But anyway, this Brooks Newmark, he kept emailing Matt Hancock, and he urged him to support and to help and to make this controversial deal happen. And lo and behold, it did. The year after it happened, Mr. Brooks Newmark's company, it's called Brooks Newmark & Co. Previously, the company was worth minus £2,300 and hadn't submitted any accounts for the past 4 years. Suddenly, the next year, it was worth £2.3 million. So somehow or other, they made £2.5 million that year. I don't know how it could have happened. But anyway, this Zoe Lay, who was also, as I say, with Brooks Newmark, she was pitching for Worldlink Resources. She previously had sold dog food. But I think she must have thought, she must be a very clever businesswoman, because she set up a company from scratch. And it was called Life Partners Limited, and this was to supply PPE. And I suppose being involved, she was able to get a contract. And in her first year, as I say, she must be a really, really good businesswoman, because in her first year of trading, she made a profit of £17,613, 184. Now, a lot of people think that's probably almost enough to be able to retire on. Pay quite a lot of nurses' salaries on that. But the company that's most interesting that Lord Bethel dealt with is Randox. Now, Randox, you may remember, is the company that were paying Owen Paterson, the disgraced MP. They were paying him £100,000 a year as an MP to be a consultant for them. And so he was very keen to promote their interests. And when the PPE thing came up, he got very interested, he got in touch with Bethel, and they had a meeting, Bethel and Owen Paterson and Randox, and they discussed the contract, which was duly awarded for £600 million. But unfortunately, this is where poor Lord Bethel is such unfortunate. All that trouble with his phones. Unfortunately, he doesn't know what happened to the notes of the meeting, and nobody else does. See, Owen Paterson, he didn't keep any notes either, and presumably Randox did that. So nobody knows what happened to that meeting where they got that £600 million contract, £600 million of public money. And that particular year, Randox, the previous year they'd lost £19 million, and that particular year after that contract of £600 million, they made a profit of £225,462,000. So they did quite well out of it. But as I say, they can't find the notes of the meeting, so nobody really knows, and we all know that Owen Paterson subsequently had to resign. And I just really wanted to mention these three because, I mean, there are plenty more. We all know about Michel Moan. We all know about the jewellery designer in Florida who got a huge contract and all the rest of it. Just rip off. But this is such an utter disgrace. Contracts awarded without contract up to July 2020 were £17 billion. I mean, there's an awful lot of public money to be throwing around to firms that have made these huge profits. Everywhere you look, they made huge profits, and they disappear. And then we'll never get this money back. They'll all have bought their Bentleys, they'll all bought their second homes in Florida, and they'll all be retiring now, having a good time for the rest of their lives. Multi-millionaires, all of them. And yet the whole country is so desperate, and there's so many people are so poor, and there are nurses on strike and doctors on strike and everybody else is on strike because they haven't got enough money to make ends meet. It really is disgusting, and they get away with it. And then this Lord Bethel has the audacity to appear on Newsnight saying why doctors shouldn't have any money. Now, no one would suggest for a moment that Lord Bethel benefited anyway from these massively profitable contracts, or that Matt Hancock benefited anyway, or that Michael Gove benefited anyway, or that Priti Patel. No, they're all doing it because this is what they thought was the right thing to do. None of them had any financial interest. I'm quite sure of that. But we all have paid a great deal of money for this, and it's absolutely rotten. It is so corrupt, and I think it's a great pity that we can't really look forward with much optimism about there ever being any proper inquiry or anyone being brought to account, because it's really a disgrace, and it's a disgrace we can't afford. Anyhow, that's what I think about it. If you watched this far, thank you very much indeed, and until next time, bye for now.